Welcome to Charts Today Europe. My name's David Linton, and today's edition for Wednesday, the 24th of October, comes to you from London. And the market's recovering a little bit in Asia and opening up this morning in Europe. So we are seeing a bit of recovery. Wall Street actually did fall yesterday, but recovered somewhat off its lows. So that has perked the market up a little bit today. We are seeing the dollar still holding its strength, the dollar index. The euro still looking weak against the dollar. The dollar looking stronger against the yen. There was a flight to the yen yesterday. It's often seen as a risk asset. And sterling actually now below 130 quite convincingly, and we've got downside targets 126, 128 for sterling. Against the euro, sterling is also lower. Against the Swiss franc, sterling is lower, and against the Aussie dollar, sterling is lower. So we are seeing sterling being hit. Bitcoin is up 2/3% this morning, having jumped overnight. So that is actually the first time we're seeing Bitcoin making a decisive move for the last week or so. But we do still have medium-term bearishness there. So looking at the US markets, the S&P, it did actually close off the lows, quite considerably off the lows, to end up higher than the low that we saw just over a week ago. So uh, good news that we did actually manage to close higher, but still the chart looks pretty bearish. Nasdaq also looking bearish below the cloud, and the Dow Jones index, actually the only index really holding on to its bullish position. Still looking a little bit like a double top if you look at that long-term chart. So still a worry. Not many downside targets on the Dow. The interesting index in the US is the Russell 2000, the broader based index of 2,000 stocks, looking very bearish, having fallen to lows below what we saw a week ago. So in this instance, this is in effect a market breadth indicator in itself. We are seeing the smaller caps falling away. The futures are down this morning, so it does suggest the US will open down again. And we're seeing the S&P future down 2/3%, the Nasdaq E-mini down nearly 3/4%, and so at the moment it is looking a little bit bearish. Looking at the European markets, we see the relief that the US didn't open as low, so we've gained some of that back. The UK FTSE is actually still looking pretty bearish on all three time frames, but no clear downside targets really. So that's quite key. The the mid caps in the UK, the 250, actually looking pretty worrying as well. And again, a shortage of downside targets at the moment. So still looking very bearish indeed. The DAX is up 1/3% this morning, but boy oh boy does that chart look bearish all three time frames, and lots of downside targets on the DAX. And the CAC 40 also looking bearish with a 5% downside target. So markets really do look very bearish on these charts now. The Japanese market actually closed a little bit higher, but virtually unchanged. The Hang Seng was down 1/3%, and the Chinese market was up 1/3%. So fairly sedate compared to some of the recent moves that we've seen. And the Indian market also was up 0.4%, but still looking pretty worrying. The Aussie market down 1/4%. Big moves yesterday on Brent crude. We saw crude oil really falling away here. This is on the 60-minute chart. We've got a downside target of 75. This reflecting sentiment really that just globally we're seeing sell-off. WTI also heading lower. Big beneficiary yesterday was gold. Touched 1240 at one point. We're now down at 1230 this morning, but still bullish and having activated upside targets now. So we do still have a pretty bullish picture developing on gold. And looking at 10-year yields in the US, we're sitting at 3.15%. Short-term bearish, but we did recover a lot of yesterday's fall there. And the Bund, the German bonds, actually up this morning. So we're just seeing that as steady. All this data coming from Thomson Reuters Icon, or if you're a private user, Metastock Zenith, which is the same system, from as little as $100 a month. So pretty good going. Looking at my stocks in Europe, actually this screen, all this data coming from Yahoo. We see here the world indices actually fairly down, red picture across the board here. The green picture coming in from Europe and Asia. So this is today's movement, and that's just highlighting what we're seeing here. The CAC up 0.5%, for example. Uh, Taking a look at the Nasdaq, we see here that we had some pretty big moves yesterday. Google recovered somewhat in the day, but still looks pretty bearish. Looking at Amazon, Amazon actually was down on the day, but just holding on to its bull trend. And the downside targets, they're not activated. Apple has been a real stalwart, continuing to outperform the market, 27% outperformance. Of course, the biggest stock in the market, so that is holding things up at the moment, which showed up in that relative strength of the main indices versus the Russell 2000. Looking at Facebook, Facebook down 0.25% yesterday, still looking pretty bearish. Downside targets on Facebook, so that's still a pretty clear-cut situation. Microsoft was lower, 1.4%, holding on to its trends though. Netflix was up 1%. Nvidia really does look like it's had the end of its run. We're really seeing now this fall away, unwinding, and we've got downside targets on Nvidia. So that was an amazing run that now looks to be over. One of the big moves yesterday was Tesla up nearly 13% on word that a hedge fund that had been very bearish on Tesla is now turned bullish, and so that's pulled Tesla away from that critical 250 level. Taking a look at UK stocks this morning, the top performers, Randgold Resources up 3.78%. Just see these prices coming in from Yahoo now. Burberry down up 3%, Everaz up 2%, and Halma up 1.95%. So quite key there. Looking at the fallers, we do still have some. St James's Place has really been falling away, and Hargreaves Lansdown. We're seeing the financials really been hit there. So quite interesting there. We see banks, financials really struggling this morning. Burberry up 3%. So we are just seeing quite a variation in moves there. Looking at the mid caps, the 250. Looking at Thomas Cook up 3%, so looking quite strong there. Superdry, of course, after profits warning last week, recovering a little bit, but looking very bearish indeed on the charts. And if we look at the poor performance today, we've got Stobbart Group down 6.7%, Aegean Oil down 6%. So we are seeing some quite big moves here. And Metro Bank down 5.7%. Looking at this Euro stocks, we see here that across Europe, if we just hit on the top percentage performance, Kering Group up nearly 11%. Again, this chart looking very worrying on the medium term, but we do have a few performances up 8%. We're seeing really big moves in the market here. Orion. And then if we look at the other end of the 600, we do have some pretty big falls there. 9% on Malden. Metro, UK Bank looking pretty worrying and bearish on all time frames there with downside targets. That's it for today. Until tomorrow, happy charting. See you then.